It all started when my grandmother passed away last year. My name is Sarah Daniels, and I work as an antique dealer in a quaint little town in Massachusetts. When Grandma died, she left me with a collection of her most cherished belongings. Among them, I found an old music box tucked away in the corner of her attic, almost as if she'd hidden it on purpose. The box was beautiful, with ornate carvings and strange symbols etched into its wooden surface. It seemed like a perfect addition to my antique collection, something unique that could be a centerpiece in my shop. I remember the moment I first laid eyes on it. There was something almost mesmerizing about its design. I couldn't resist bringing it home. I thought it would look lovely on my mantel, a piece of family history to admire. But there was a strange feeling I couldn't shake off. Something about the box felt different, almost heavy, with a kind of energy I couldn't explain. At the time, I shrugged it off as my imagination running wild. After all, I was still mourning my grandmother's death and feeling a bit sentimental. Once I got it home, I set it on a shelf in my living room. For a while, it just sat there, blending in with the rest of my antiques. But the more I looked at it, the more curious I became about its origins. I wanted to know where it came from, why my grandmother had kept it hidden away for so long. I figured it must have some interesting history, maybe even a bit of value, given its unique craftsmanship. So, I started to look into it, asking around and doing some research in my spare time. It wasn't long before I found myself drawn to the box more often. I'd catch myself staring at it without realizing, almost like it was calling out to me. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to open it. I turned the tiny key and lifted the lid, expecting to hear a cheerful little tune like the ones you hear from those old-fashioned music boxes. Instead, what came out was something completely different, a soft, eerie lullaby that seemed to fill the room with a strange, almost suffocating presence. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. At first, I thought the lullaby was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something off about it. It sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I chalked it up to fatigue and decided not to think too much of it. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't get the melody out of my head. It played over and over in my mind, like a broken record, keeping me awake. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a song, nothing more. Yet, deep down, I knew there was something more to this music box than met the eye. Over the next few days, the box stayed on its shelf, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I found myself wondering why Grandma had kept it hidden. Did she know something about it that I didn't? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a reason she'd left it to me specifically. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but the more I pondered it, the more I felt like the box was somehow connected to her, like it held a piece of her that I didn't understand. I had to find out more, and so my journey into the unknown began, with an antique music box and a melody that I couldn't forget. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to know the truth. What was it about this music box that felt so alive? Why did it seem to draw me in, like a moth to a flame? I couldn't let it go. And that's when I decided to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets hidden beneath its surface. The first time I wound up that music box, it was just out of curiosity. I wanted to hear the tune again, see if maybe it sounded different in the light of day. But as soon as that haunting lullaby began, I felt an eerie chill run down my spine. It was a soft, almost delicate melody, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. It echoed through the house, filling every corner, every shadow. I stood there, frozen, listening as it seemed to weave itself into the very walls. I wanted to close it, to shut off the sound, but my hands wouldn't move. As the days went by, I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was just an old music box, nothing to be afraid of. Yet, each night, I found myself drawn back to it. The tune would start to play on its own out of nowhere, the lid slowly lifting as if moved by some unseen hand. And every time it played, the air in the room grew colder, the shadows longer. It was as if the house itself was breathing, alive with that haunting melody. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched, like something was lurking just beyond my vision. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was all in my head, some trick my mind was playing on me. I'd been under a lot of stress, dealing with my grandmother's death and all. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. It clung to me like a second skin, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. The music would start at odd hours, always when I was alone, always when I least expected it. It was as if the box had a mind of its own, choosing moments to catch me off guard. I decided to keep the box closed, to stop it from playing. But even then, the melody lingered in my mind. I'd hear it in my dreams, that same haunting tune looping over and over. It was like the music had woven itself into my thoughts, my very being. I couldn't escape it. And then there were the cold spots. Pockets of icy air that would appear out of nowhere, making me shiver even when the rest of the house was warm. It was like the music brought with it a chill from another world. One night, I woke up to the sound of the box playing, even though I was sure I'd locked it up. The room was freezing, and as I sat up, I saw my breath misting in the air. The lullaby was louder than ever, almost deafening. I could feel the notes vibrating through the floor, up through my bed, into my very bones. I wanted to scream, to get up and throw the damn thing out the window, but I couldn't move. It was like something was holding me down, keeping me there, forcing me to listen. I started to realize that the music wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. It filled the house like a fog, thick and suffocating. I could feel it pressing in on me, pushing me towards some unseen edge. And the colder it got, the more I felt like I was slipping away, losing myself to whatever force was inside that box. I knew then that this wasn't just some trick of the mind. There was something in that music, something dark and hungry, and it was reaching out for me. By then, I was too scared to touch the box, too afraid to even go near it. But it didn't matter. The music had its claws in me, and I knew it wasn't going to let go. It wanted something from me, something I wasn't ready to give, but what? And why me? I couldn't answer those questions, not yet. All I knew was that I had to find out, or the music would never stop. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this music box than I had first thought. It wasn't just the melody that haunted me. It was the way it seemed to cling to me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. So, I did what anyone in my position might do. I started digging. I needed to know where this box came from, what secrets it held, and why it seemed so determined to be a part of my life. I began my search at the local library, poring over old newspapers and records, looking for any mention of a cursed music box. Days turned into nights, and my obsession grew. I found an article about a family from the early 1900s who had owned a similar music box. The article was sparse on details, but it mentioned a string of mysterious deaths that had followed them after they brought the box into their home. My heart raced as I read the words, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. It felt like I was uncovering something that was meant to stay buried, something that had been waiting for me to find it. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close to understanding. As I continued my research, I stumbled upon an old photograph of the family. They were standing in front of a large, imposing house, the music box visible on a table beside them. Their eyes seemed hollow, almost vacant, as if they knew something terrible was coming. The caption underneath mentioned that every member of the family had died within a year of the photograph being taken. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could it be true? Could this box really be cursed? And if so, what had I brought into my home? The more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just a string of bad luck. There were too many coincidences, too many deaths that couldn't be explained. I found other stories, other families who had come into contact with a similar box, each meeting a tragic end. Some had gone mad, others had vanished without a trace, but the common thread was always the music box. I felt like I was piecing together a dark puzzle, one that spanned generations. And the more pieces I found, the clearer the picture became. One night, I had a dream, or maybe it was a nightmare. I saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, its face obscured by darkness. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, and it seemed to be watching me, waiting. I could hear the lullaby playing in the background, slow and distorted, like a record being played at the wrong speed. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that I was in too deep, but I didn't know how to get out. The nightmares became more frequent after that. Each one more vivid, more terrifying than the last. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, the sound of the lullaby ringing in my ears. I started seeing things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I felt like I was being watched, like something was following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming for me, something dark and ancient that I couldn't understand. I needed answers, needed to know what I was dealing with. But every lead I followed seemed to end in more questions, more uncertainty. I was losing myself in this search, but I couldn't stop. Not now, not when I was so close to the truth. Whatever was in that box, whatever curse it carried, it wasn't done with me yet. And I had a feeling it never would be. I'll never forget that evening when Lisa came over for dinner. She was my best friend, always curious and a bit skeptical about my antiques obsession. We were chatting over a glass of wine when she noticed a music box on the shelf. "What's that?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with interest. I hesitated for a moment, not sure if I should tell her the whole story. But then, I figured, why not? Maybe she could help me make sense of it all. I explained everything, the strange lullaby, the unsettling cold, the eerie dreams. She listened intently, a mix of disbelief and concern on her face. Lisa, being Lisa, wanted to hear the music for herself. She thought maybe I was just overthinking it, that there had to be a logical explanation for everything. Reluctantly, I agreed to play the music box. As the haunting melody began, I watched her expression change. At first, she looked intrigued, even amused. But as the tune continued, her smile faded. Her eyes grew wide, and she seemed almost transfixed by the sound. The room felt colder, the shadows longer, and a sudden sense of dread washed over me. I wanted to stop the music, but something kept me from moving. When the lullaby finally ended, Lisa seemed to snap out of a trance. She blinked a few times, shook her head, and forced a smile, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "That was weird," she said quietly, setting her glass down with a shaky hand. She made an excuse about needing to get up early the next morning and left in a hurry. I watched her go, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Something didn't feel right, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just spooked by my story, I thought. Maybe it was nothing. The next morning, I got a call from Lisa's sister. Her voice was shaky, filled with panic and confusion. Lisa had been found dead in her apartment, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. I felt my heart stop, the phone slipping from my grasp. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced back to the night before, to the look on Lisa's face as the music played. Had I done this? Had I somehow unleashed something that couldn't be controlled? I felt a wave of guilt and fear crash over me, knowing that my curiosity had cost Lisa her life. I couldn't get her expression out of my mind, the sheer horror frozen on her face, like she'd seen something no one should ever have to see. The police had no explanation, no cause of death. It was like her heart had just stopped from pure fear. I wanted to scream, to cry, but all I could do was sit there, numb, the reality of it all sinking in. I knew then that this wasn't over, that the music box wasn't just a harmless antique. It was something much darker, something that had now claimed a life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the lullaby in my head, over and over, like a broken record. I felt a presence in the room, a cold, malevolent energy that seemed to seep into every corner, every shadow. I knew I had to get rid of the music box, to break whatever curse it carried. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I was terrified, paralyzed by fear and guilt. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't let anyone else near it. In the days that followed, I tried to distance myself from the box, to push it out of my mind. But it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's face, heard the echo of that haunting lullaby. I knew I had to do something. But what? Destroy it? Bury it? I had no idea. All I knew was that I couldn't let it hurt anyone else. But as the days turned into nights, I realized that the box wasn't done with me yet. It still had a hold on me, and I was powerless to break free. After Lisa's death, the atmosphere in my house shifted from unsettling to downright oppressive. The music box, which had once been just an object, now felt like a living, breathing entity. It played more frequently, and each time the haunting lullaby began, the air grew heavy with a sense of dread. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, the shadows in every corner darker and more menacing. I could feel a presence in the house, something that fed off my fear, growing stronger with every passing day. It wasn't just the music that bothered me anymore. It was the silence that followed. When the music stopped, the house would fall into an eerie quiet that felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. I started seeing things, dark shapes moving just out of sight, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. It was as if the house had a pulse, a heartbeat that thumped in time with my own. I'd hear footsteps at odd hours, soft and slow, creeping up the stairs or pacing just outside my bedroom door. I knew I was not alone. The more the music box played, the more I felt the darkness creeping into my life. My dreams were filled with shadows, cold hands reaching out to pull me into the abyss. And in the waking hours, I'd see flashes of a figure in the mirror, just behind my reflection. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever this was, it was real, and it was getting closer. I tried to rid myself of the box, throwing it into the river one night, hoping the water would carry it far away from me. But the next morning, there it was, sitting on my doorstep, dry as a bone and perfectly intact. I stared at it in disbelief, my hands trembling. It felt like the box was mocking me, reminding me that I could never escape its grasp. I didn't know what to do, where to turn. I felt trapped, caught in a web of fear and confusion, and the more I struggled, the tighter it seemed to wrap around me. As the days went on, the presence in the house grew more aggressive. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the box open, the lullaby playing softly, almost as if it were whispering secrets to the darkness. I started seeing the figure more clearly now, always in the periphery of my vision, always just out of reach. It seemed to be watching me, studying me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking, and I knew that whatever it was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each passing day. I knew I needed help, but who could I turn to? Everyone I had told thought I was losing my mind. They didn't understand the power of this thing, the way it seeped into your soul and twisted everything around you. I tried reaching out to a local priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or exorcism, but he refused to come near the house. He said there were some things even the church couldn't touch, and this was one of them. I was on my own, left to face this darkness alone. The nights were the worst. The cold seemed to seep through the walls, chilling me to the bone. I could hear the music in my head, even when the box was silent. It was like it had become a part of me, a dark melody that played on a loop, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I knew then that I couldn't keep going like this. I had to find a way to end it, to break free from whatever curse had latched onto my life. But how? That was the question that kept me up at night, the question that haunted my every waking moment. And I knew that until I found the answer, there would be no escape. Desperation was starting to take its toll on me. The nights seemed longer, the shadows darker, and the oppressive feeling in the house grew unbearable. I knew I had to do something, anything, to rid myself of this cursed object. That's when I decided to reach out to Father O'Brien, a local priest known for his knowledge of the occult and his willingness to confront the unknown. I wasn't sure if he would believe me, but I had to try. The moment he heard the word music box, his face paled, and he agreed to come over the next day. When Father O'Brien arrived, he brought with him a sense of calm and authority that momentarily eased my fears. He took one look at the box and frowned deeply, muttering prayers under his breath. He asked me to tell him everything, every detail, no matter how small. As I recounted the events, the strange melodies, the cold spots, the dark figure, he listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little. Finally, he sighed and said that he would perform a cleansing ritual. "This isn't just any object," he warned. "It's a conduit, a doorway for something much darker." We began the ritual in the living room, where the box had been since the day I brought it home. Father O'Brien sprinkled holy water around the room, chanting in Latin, his voice strong and steady. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe he could rid my house of this dark presence. But as the ritual continued, the temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The box began to vibrate on the shelf, a low hum emanating from it that grew louder and more menacing with each passing second. Suddenly, the music box sprang open on its own, and the haunting lullaby filled the room, louder and more distorted than I had ever heard. Father O'Brien's chanting faltered, and he took a step back, his face contorted with fear. "This isn't right," he muttered, more to himself than to me. This is something ancient, something evil." The air around us seemed to thicken, pressing down on us like a heavy weight. I could feel my heart racing, my palms slick with sweat. I wanted to run, to flee from this house, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the music stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then I saw it, the dark figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. It was closer now, more defined, no longer just a shadow. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at me, its mouth opening in a silent scream. I could feel the air leave my lungs, my body trembling with fear. Father O'Brien took a step forward, holding out his crucifix, but his hand shook, and I could see the terror in his eyes. Without warning, the figure lunged forward, its form blurring as it moved towards us. Father O'Brien shouted a final prayer, but it was cut short as he stumbled back, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Get out!" he screamed at me, his voice hoarse. "Leave this place now." But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a fear so intense it felt like my very soul was being crushed. The figure stopped just inches from my face, its hollow eyes boring into mine, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the house was quiet again, the oppressive weight lifted, but Father O'Brien was gone. I looked around, my head spinning, my body aching from the cold. The music box lay on the floor, its lid closed, the room eerily still. I wanted to believe it was over, that the figure was gone, but I knew better. The priest's final words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that whatever this was, it wasn't finished with me yet. The house was quiet, and I knew in my bones that this was just the beginning of something far more terrifying. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark figure, its hollow eyes staring into my soul. The room was cold, far colder than it should have been, and I could feel a creeping dread settling into my bones. I kept hearing whispers, faint and distant, like voices coming from the walls. They were calling my name, beckoning me closer to the music box. I tried to ignore them, tried to block out the sound, but it was no use. The darkness had taken hold, and I was losing my grip on reality. I started to feel like I was being watched, even when I was alone. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting across the room, a flicker of something just beyond my vision. I was constantly on edge, my nerves frayed, every sound making me jump. The house no longer felt like my home. It was like it had become a living entity, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. I knew I had to get out, but where could I go? The darkness wasn't just in the house. It was inside me now, burrowed deep into my mind. I tried calling out to Father O'Brien, hoping he might have some answers, but there was no response. His phone went straight to voicemail, and I began to fear the worst. What had happened to him? Had the dark figure taken him? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next, that it was only a matter of time before the darkness consumed me completely. I had to find a way to stop it, to break free from its grip, but how? I felt so helpless, so utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The music box started playing again, on its own, the melody slow and distorted. It filled the room with a heavy, oppressive energy that seemed to push down on my chest. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding in my ears. I tried to cover my ears, to block out the sound, but it was useless. The music was inside me now, echoing in my mind, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and when I turned, I saw the dark figure standing right behind me, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I screamed, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, my body frozen in place. The figure leaned in closer, its breath cold against my skin, whispering my name in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel its presence, its darkness seeping into me, filling every part of my being. I wanted to fight it, to push it away, but I was powerless, trapped in its grip, unable to break free. The days began to blur together after that, each one darker than the last. I couldn't tell what was real anymore, couldn't distinguish between reality and the nightmares. The music played constantly now, a never-ending loop that filled my mind with its haunting melody. I could feel myself slipping away, losing my grip on who I was. I knew I had to do something, had to find a way to end this, but I didn't know where to start. The darkness had taken hold, and I was running out of time. I found myself drawn back to the music box, despite everything, unable to resist its pull. I knew it was dangerous, knew that it was the source of all this, but I couldn't stay away. I wound it up one last time, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. The melody started again, soft and slow, but this time it sounded different, almost welcoming. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, and for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the end. But as the figure emerged from the shadows, I realized that it was only the beginning. Unable to sleep and teetering on the edge of madness, I found myself inexplicably drawn back to the music box. It was as if some unseen force was pulling me towards it, urging me to give in, to finally accept whatever darkness lay within. My hands trembled as I reached out and wound the key once more. The box creaked open, and the familiar, haunting lullaby began to play, its notes slow and almost mournful. This time, however, there was something different in the air, something more sinister lurking beneath the melody. As the lullaby played, I felt an overwhelming urge to listen, to let the music wash over me and fill every part of my being. The room grew colder, the shadows darker, and the air around me seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. I could see my breath fogging in the dim light, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I should turn away, that I should close the box and end this once and for all, but I couldn't. The music had me in its grip, holding me in place, refusing to let go. The figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light of the room. It was fully visible now, a ghastly, rotting specter with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. Its skin hung loosely on its bones, and a foul, decaying smell filled the air. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body felt heavy, weighed down by an invisible force. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking, watching me with a hunger that sent shivers through my entire being. It spoke then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, echoing in my mind. "You've listened," it said, its tone dripping with malice. "You've let me in." I felt a cold, icy hand wrap around my throat, squeezing tight. My vision blurred, and I could feel the darkness closing in around me. I wanted to fight, to break free, but I was powerless, trapped in its grasp. The music grew louder, more distorted, and I realized with a chilling certainty that this was the end. But then, something shifted. A memory surfaced, my grandmother's voice, soft and soothing, telling me stories of light and hope, of finding strength in the darkest of times. I clung to that memory, to her voice, as the figure tightened its grip. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. With all the strength I could muster, I reached out and slammed the lid of the music box shut. The lullaby cut off abruptly, leaving the room in a heavy silence. The figure recoiled, its grip loosening, and for a moment, I thought I had won. But the victory was short-lived. The box began to shake violently on the table, its lid rattling as if something inside was trying to break free. The figure let out a guttural scream, a sound so terrifying it chilled me to my core. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. I backed away, my heart racing, knowing that this wasn't over, that it would never be over. The darkness had been unleashed, and there was no way to put it back. I ran from the room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the music box playing again, its melody faint but persistent, following me down the hallway. I knew I had to leave, to get out of this house and never look back. But as I reached the front door, I hesitated. A part of me wanted to stay, to face whatever was coming, to see this through to the end. I turned back, looking down the darkened hallway, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light, a glimpse of something that could save me. But then the figure reappeared, its hollow eyes fixed on me, and I knew that there was no escape. The music played on, drawing me back into the darkness, and I realized that this was my fate. The box wasn't just a curse, it was a choice. A choice to give into the darkness, to let it consume me, or to fight with every last breath. And as I stood there, teetering on the edge of the abyss, I knew I had only one option left. I stood there at the edge, torn between running away and confronting the darkness that had taken over my life. The house was silent except for the faint echo of the lullaby that seemed to come from all around me, a soft whisper in the shadows. I knew I couldn't leave it like this. I couldn't let the darkness win. With a deep breath, I turned back towards the music box, determined to end this once and for all, even if it meant facing the terror head-on. The hallway stretched out before me, longer than I remembered, each step I took echoing through the silence. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, the air thick with tension. The box sat on the table at the end of the hall, its lid slightly ajar, the soft, eerie glow emanating from within. The figure stood beside it, its eyes locked on mine, a silent challenge. I could feel its hunger, its need to pull me into the void with it, but I pushed the fear aside. I had come too far to back down now. As I approached the music box, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, its gaze never leaving me. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the lid of the box. The wood was cold, almost painfully so, but I didn't pull away. I knew this was my only chance. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, and pushed the lid open. The lullaby started again, slow and haunting, filling the air with its mournful tune. The figure stepped closer, its skeletal hand reaching out towards me, but I didn't flinch. I kept my focus on the music box, on the source of the darkness. I knew I had to destroy it, to break whatever curse it held. But how? The music grew louder, more distorted, and I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. I grabbed the box, lifting it off the table, and for a moment, I thought I felt a pulse, a heartbeat beneath my fingers. It was alive, or at least, something inside it was. The figure loomed over me, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light, but I didn't let go. I had to end this. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled the music box across the room. It shattered against the wall, the pieces scattering across the floor, the lullaby finally silenced. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I held my breath, waiting, hoping that it was over, that I had finally broken the curse. But then, the shadows began to swirl, gathering around the figure, pulling it back into the darkness. It let out a final, ear-piercing scream, and then it was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving only an empty space where it had stood. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The house was still, the oppressive weight lifted, but I knew that the darkness wasn't truly gone. It had retreated for now, but it would be back. I could feel it lurking in the corners of my mind, a cold, lingering presence that I could never fully escape. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The music box was gone, but the curse remained, a dark shadow over my life that I would never truly outrun. As I sat there, staring at the broken pieces of the box, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could live in fear, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the darkness to return, or I could face it head on, every day, refusing to let it control me. The decision wasn't easy, but I knew what I had to do. I got up, took a deep breath, and walked out of the house, into the light of the morning sun, ready to face whatever came next.